The Psychology of Money, a timeless lesson on wealth, greed, and happiness by Morgan Housel. Summarized by the Rich Diary podcast for the purpose of education, information, and training for personal development. Kindly take note that we do not own the full right of the content of this work. It is solely meant for educational purposes. This podcast is summarized into 20 chapters, with each chapter detailing on the principles shared in the original piece. You can use the link in the description below to get a copy of the full book. The central idea of The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel is that financial success has far more to do with human behavior than with intelligence, technical knowledge, or mathematical skill. Housel argues that the way people think, feel, and act around money, shaped by emotions, personal experiences, biases, fear, greed, patience, and ego, determines their long-term financial outcomes more than knowing complex financial formulas. In essence, money decisions are not made on spreadsheets. They're made in real life, under stress, uncertainty, and emotion. Key themes that support this central idea are: behavior beats brilliance. Ordinary people who control their emotions often outperform experts who take excessive risks. Personal history shapes financial beliefs. Everyone's view of money is influenced by their upbringing, economic environment, and past experiences. Compounding favors patience. Long-term success comes from consistency and time, not short-term wins. Wealth is what you don't see. True wealth is freedom, optionality, and security, not visible spending. Risk and luck matter more than we admit. Outcomes are influenced by chance, so humility and margin of safety are essential. Enough is powerful. Knowing when to stop prevents ruin and preserves happiness. By the end of this podcast, you will understand that mastering your behavior with money, patience, humility, and self-control is more important than mastering finance itself. You ready? Now let's begin. Introduction: The greatest show on earth. Doing well with money has little to do with how smart you are and a lot to do with how you behave. Morgan Housel. Money is one of the most powerful forces shaping our lives, yet it remains one of the most misunderstood. In The Psychology of Money, Morgan Housel invites us to step away from spreadsheets and formulas and instead examine the emotional, psychological, and behavioral forces behind financial decisions. This audiobook is not about stock tips or secret strategies. It is about how people think, feel, and act when money is involved, and why that matters more than intelligence. Housel begins by reminding us that money decisions are rarely made in calm, controlled environments. They are made at the dinner table, during moments of fear, excitement, insecurity, and hope. Two people can be equally smart, equally informed, and still make completely opposite financial decisions because their experiences are different. Money, unlike physics, is not governed by universal laws. It is governed by human behavior. Through powerful contrasts, the author shows us that financial success is not reserved for the highly educated or the professionally trained. A humble janitor, patiently investing small amounts over decades, can outperform a brilliant executive who lacks emotional discipline. This reality feels unfair, but it is also liberating. It means that success with money is accessible to ordinary people who master patience, consistency, and self-control. Another major theme introduced here is humility. Because money outcomes are influenced by luck and risk, we must be careful not to judge others, or ourselves, too harshly. Success is rarely 100% skill, and failure is rarely 100% stupidity. Understanding this helps us develop empathy, resilience, and better long-term decision-making. Housel also highlights how new the modern financial world really is. Retirement accounts, index funds, and widespread consumer debt are only a few decades old. We are all, in many ways, beginners. This explains why mistakes are common and why learning from behavioral patterns matters more than memorizing rules. At its core, this book argues that money is a mirror. It reveals our values, fears, ambitions, and insecurities. When we understand ourselves better, we manage money better. And when we manage money better, we gain not just wealth, but freedom, peace of mind, and control over our time. As you listen to this audiobook, resist the urge to compare your journey with anyone else's. Instead, focus on understanding your own behaviors with money. Awareness is the first step towards lasting financial confidence. Chapter 1. No one's crazy. What seems crazy to you might make perfect sense to someone else. Morgan Housel. People do strange things with money. They gamble, overspend, hoard cash, panic sell investments, or take massive risks that seem irrational. But according to Morgan Housel, no one is actually crazy. Every financial decision makes sense to the person making it based on their unique life experiences. Our views on money are shaped less by textbooks and more by what we personally live through. The economy you grow up in, the financial struggles or stability of your parents, inflation, recessions, job markets, all of these experiences quietly program how you perceive risk, safety, and opportunity. These experiences form what Housel calls your personal financial reality. Because of this, two intelligent people can strongly disagree on financial choices and both be reasonable. Someone who lived through extreme inflation may fear holding cash. Someone who grew up during a stock market crash may distrust investing entirely. Neither is wrong. They are responding to what history taught them. Housel illustrates this idea with striking examples. Some people buy lottery tickets despite being poor. From the outside, this seems irresponsible. But from their perspective, the lottery offers something rare: hope. When saving feels impossible and opportunities feel limited, paying for a dream can feel worth the cost. Understanding this does not mean endorsing bad decisions. It means recognizing the emotional logic behind them. The chapter also explains why studying history alone is not enough. Reading about recessions cannot replicate the fear of watching your savings disappear while your family depends on you. Emotional experiences shape behavior far more than data ever will. Money decisions are also difficult because the modern financial system is new. Retirement planning, student loans, index funds, and credit cards are recent inventions. We expect people to be experts in systems that barely existed 2 generations ago. Mistakes are not a sign of stupidity, they are a sign of inexperience. The most powerful lesson of this chapter is empathy. When you realize that everyone views money through their own lens, you become less judgmental and more thoughtful. This awareness improves not only your finances, but also your relationships. Before criticizing your past money decisions or someone else's, pause and ask, what experiences shaped this behavior? Use that insight to make calmer, wiser choices moving forward. Chapter 2. Luck and Risk. Nothing is as good or as bad as it seems. Morgan Housel. Luck and risk are two forces quietly shaping every financial outcome. They are inseparable siblings, often invisible yet incredibly powerful. Morgan Housel explains that while effort and intelligence matter, outcomes are never fully within our control. For every success story we admire, there are countless unseen stories where equally talented people didn't get the same results. The chapter explores one of the most uncomfortable but essential truths about money and success. outcomes are never fully earned, nor are they fully deserved. Behind every financial success is some measure of luck, and behind every failure is some measure of risk. Ignoring either leads to flawed judgments, dangerous decisions, and misplaced confidence. Morgan Housel opens the chapter by reminding readers that luck and risk are siblings. They are two sides of the same coin, forces outside individual control that heavily influence outcomes. Luck represents favorable events that boost success, while risk represents unfavorable events that derail it. Both are always present, even if they are invisible in hindsight. A core idea introduced early is that nothing is ever as good or as bad as it seems. When people succeed, we tend to attribute their outcomes to intelligence, discipline, or skill. When they fail, we often blame incompetence, laziness, or poor judgment. In reality, the world is far messier. Randomness, timing, and external forces shape results far more than we like to admit. To illustrate this, Housel tells the story of Bill Gates. Gates is undeniably brilliant and hardworking, but his success was also influenced by extraordinary luck. Gates attended one of the only high schools in the world in the late 1960s that had access to a computer. This gave him a massive head start at a time when computers were rare and expensive. Out of hundreds of millions of high school-aged students globally, only a few hundred had access to that kind of technology, and Gates happened to be one of them. Gates himself acknowledges this advantage, openly stating that without that early access, Microsoft likely would not exist. This does not diminish his intelligence or effort, but it highlights how being in the right place at the right time can amplify talent in ways skill alone cannot. Housel then introduces the counterweight to luck, risk, through the tragic story of Gates's close friend, Kent Evans. Evans was just as talented, ambitious, and driven as Gates. He could easily have become a Microsoft co-founder, but Evans died in a mountaineering accident while still in high school, a rare but devastating outcome of risk. A single, uncontrollable event erased a future that looked just as promising as Gates's. The contrast between Gates and Evans is powerful because it shows two people with nearly identical skills and opportunities can end up with radically different outcomes simply because one encountered luck and the other encountered risk. The same magnitude of randomness working in opposite directions. This leads to a critical realization. The world is too complex for effort alone to dictate outcomes. There are too many moving parts: economic cycles, political changes, technological shifts, health, timing, and sheer chance for any result to be fully explained by personal decisions. Housel emphasizes that we often ignore luck and risk because they are difficult to measure and uncomfortable to acknowledge. Attributing success to luck can feel dismissive or insulting, while attributing failure to risk can feel like making excuses. As a result, we default to simple narratives that overemphasize skill and effort. But these narratives are dangerous. When people believe success is entirely earned, they are more likely to become arrogant, overconfident, and reckless. They take bigger risks because they assume they understand the system better than they actually do. History is filled with people who believed they were invincible right before everything fell apart. Likewise, when people believe failure is entirely due to personal flaws, they become overly self-critical, discouraged, or paralyzed by fear. They may abandon good strategies simply because they experienced bad luck, mistaking randomness for incompetence. Housel points out that extreme outcomes are especially misleading. We tend to study billionaires, legendary investors, and spectacular failures because they're interesting, but extreme outcomes are often shaped heavily by extreme luck or extreme risk, making their lessons hard to replicate. For example, he discusses historical figures like Cornelius Vanderbilt and John D. Rockefeller, whose aggressive, sometimes law-bending tactics are often praised as bold genius. But had circumstances shifted slightly, had regulators acted sooner or markets moved differently, the same behavior could have ended in ruin. The line between brilliantly bold and recklessly foolish is often only visible in hindsight. This is why success is a lousy teacher, as Bill Gates famously said. It can trick smart people into believing they can't lose. When things go well, people often attribute outcomes entirely to their decisions, underestimating how much luck played a role. This leads them to repeat risky behaviors, assuming favorable outcomes are guaranteed. Failure can be an equally misleading teacher. When things go wrong, people often assume their decisions were terrible, even when they were reasonable choices that simply encountered bad luck. This can cause people to abandon sound strategies and retreat into excessive caution. Housel argues that one of the most important skills in money management is separating the quality of a decision from the quality of its outcome. A good decision can lead to a bad result, and a bad decision can lead to a good result. Without recognizing this, it's impossible to learn effectively from experience. Because luck and risk are hard to quantify, Housel offers practical guidance rather than precise formulas. One key recommendation is to be careful who you admire and who you judge. Success stories often hide the role of luck, while failure stories often hide the role of risk. Judging people too harshly or idolizing them too blindly leads to distorted lessons. Another recommendation is to focus on broad patterns rather than individual stories. Instead of asking, "What did this specific person do to succeed?" it's more useful to ask, "What behaviors tend to work for many people across many environments?" Broad, repeatable behaviors like patience, diversification, humility, and long-term thinking are more reliable than copying the actions of outliers. Housel also encourages readers to build financial lives that are resilient to bad luck. Since risk is unavoidable, the goal is not to eliminate it, but to survive it. This means avoiding decisions that can permanently wipe you out. A single mistake should not be capable of ending your financial future. The chapter closes with a compassionate reminder. Acknowledging luck should make you humbler in success, and acknowledging risk should make you kinder to yourself in failure. Recognizing randomness doesn't remove responsibility, it adds perspective. It allows you to prepare better, judge more fairly, and avoid the arrogance that often precedes collapse. The core lesson of Chapter 2 is not pessimism, but realism. You still need discipline, effort, and good judgment, but you must also accept that the world does not owe you fairness, and outcomes will never perfectly reflect effort. The smartest approach to money is one that respects uncertainty and plans for it. The lesson is not to dismiss hard work, but to balance confidence with humility. Recognizing luck helps us avoid reckless risk-taking. Recognizing risk helps us forgive ourselves when things don't go as planned. The goal is to build a financial life resilient enough to survive bad luck and patient enough to benefit from good luck. Design your financial life so that mistakes won't ruin you and success won't make you reckless.
Chapter 3. Never Enough. The hardest financial skill is getting the goalpost to stop moving. Morgan Housel. There is a quiet danger in success, the inability to recognize when you have enough. Many people don't fail financially because they lack opportunity. They fail because their desire for more never ends. Social comparison is the real enemy. There is always someone richer, more successful, more admired. If your happiness depends on keeping up, you will never win. The only way to escape the trap is to define your own version of enough. Enough does not mean settling. It means understanding that some things, reputation, freedom, relationships, peace of mind, are too valuable to risk for marginal financial gain. Knowing when to stop is not weakness, it is wisdom. The chapter examines one of the most dangerous and destructive forces in personal finance and human behavior, the inability to know when enough is enough. Housel argues that many financial disasters, both personal and institutional, are not caused by poverty, lack of opportunity, or ignorance, but by unchecked ambition combined with rising expectations. When the goalpost for success keeps moving, even extraordinary success can end in regret. Housel opens the chapter with a powerful anecdote shared by John Bogle, the founder of Vanguard. At a party hosted by a billionaire hedge fund manager, author Kurt Vonnegut pointed out to novelist Joseph Heller that their host had made more money in a single day than Heller had earned from his wildly successful novel Catch-22 over its entire lifetime. Heller's response was simple and profound. Yes, but I have something he will never have: enough. This moment captures the essence of the chapter. In a world where comparison is endless and ambition is rewarded, contentment becomes rare. The problem is not wanting more, it is wanting more without limit. When people never define what enough means, they expose themselves to risks that can destroy everything they already have. To illustrate this danger, Housel tells the story of Rajat Gupta, a man whose rise from extreme poverty to immense success is almost unimaginable. Orphaned in India, Gupta worked his way to becoming CEO of McKinsey & Company, one of the most prestigious consulting firms in the world. He accumulated enormous wealth, reportedly around $100 million, sat on the boards of major corporations, partnered with Bill Gates on philanthropy, and had access to elite global influence. By any reasonable standard, Gupta had already won. But Gupta wanted more. He wanted to join what he perceived as the billionaire circle. Surrounded by ultra-wealthy investors, his sense of enough shifted upward. Despite already having more wealth than most people could ever spend, Gupta began engaging in insider trading, leaking confidential information for personal gain. The result was catastrophic. Gupta was convicted, imprisoned, and publicly disgraced. His reputation, career, freedom, and legacy were destroyed, not because he lacked money, but because he lacked a stopping point. Housel pairs Gupta's story with that of Bernie Madoff, one of the most infamous financial criminals in history. While Madoff is most known for running a massive Ponzi scheme, Housel emphasizes a lesser-known fact. Madoff was already enormously wealthy through legitimate means. His market-making business generated tens of millions of dollars per year. He had prestige, power, and financial security. Yet Madoff continued to chase more. The fraud that ultimately destroyed him was not driven by survival, but ambition and ego. Like Gupta, Madoff already had everything most people strive for, but still felt it wasn't enough. These stories highlight a crucial point. The most dangerous financial decisions are often made by those who already have plenty. Poverty can drive desperation, but excess can drive recklessness. When people feel they must keep winning to justify their identity or status, they are more likely to take risks that jeopardize everything they already have. Housel broadens the lesson beyond crime. Many non-criminal behaviors are fueled by the same mindset. Over-leveraging investments, taking excessive career risks, burning out at work, or chasing higher returns at the cost of peace of mind, all stem from a failure to define what enough looks like. He introduces one of the chapter's most important ideas. The hardest financial skill is getting the goalpost to stop moving. As income, wealth, or success grows, expectations tend to rise just as quickly. If satisfaction always stays one step ahead of achievement, no amount of progress will feel fulfilling. This dynamic is amplified by social comparison. People rarely measure themselves against absolute standards, they measure themselves against others.
A person earning a high income may feel poor if their peers earn more. Even those at the top compare themselves upward toward an elite group that always exists above them. Housel illustrates this with a chain of comparisons, a chain of comparisons with a chain of comparisons. A well-paid professional compares themselves to top athletes. Athletes compare themselves to hedge fund managers. Hedge fund managers compare themselves to billionaires, and billionaires compare themselves to even richer billionaires. Because the latter never ends, comparison guarantees dissatisfaction. The problem is not that ambition exists, it is that relative comparison has no finish line. There is always someone with more money, more influence, or more recognition. Chasing status in this environment is like playing a game that cannot be won. Housel shares a metaphor from Las Vegas to explain this mindset. A casino dealer once said, "The only way to win in a casino is to leave as soon as you enter." The same principle applies to wealth comparisons. The only way to win is to stop playing the game entirely by defining your own version of success. Importantly, Housel clarifies that enough does not mean settling for less or abandoning growth. It means recognizing the point beyond which additional gains no longer improve your life and may actively harm it. Knowing when to stop taking risks is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of wisdom. He identifies several things that are never worth risking, no matter the potential financial upside: reputation, freedom and independence, relationships with family and friends, long-term happiness, peace of mind. Once these are damaged, no amount of money can fully repair them. Housel reflects on Rajat Gupta's later comments after prison, in which Gupta claimed he learned not to attach too much importance to reputation. Housel strongly disagrees with this interpretation, arguing that reputation is invaluable and should be fiercely protected. The tragedy is not that Gupta lost his reputation, it's that he risked it for money he did not need. The chapter ultimately reframes wealth as a tool, not a scorecard. Money is most powerful when it provides security, freedom, and options, not when it becomes a measure of self-worth or status. The pursuit of more without boundaries often leads to anxiety, envy, and reckless behavior. The central lesson of never enough is sobering but empowering. Financial success is not about maximizing returns at all costs, but about protecting what truly matters. Defining enough creates a margin of safety that allows you to enjoy what you've built rather than constantly fearing its loss. Housel leaves readers with a timeless truth. The ability to say, "I have enough," is one of the greatest financial advantages a person can have. Without it, no level of success is ever secure. Decide what enough means for you before life decides it for you.
The Rich Diary Podcast is only for education, motivation, empowerment, and striving for mastery. Please like, subscribe, and share now.
Chapter 4. Confounding Compounding. Time is the most powerful force in investing. Morgan Housel. Compounding is simple to explain but difficult to truly grasp. Small, consistent actions repeated over time can lead to extraordinary results. The challenge is that compounding works slowly at first, so slowly that many people give up before it becomes powerful. Warren Buffett's wealth is often attributed to brilliance, but the real secret is time. Buffett started investing as a child and stayed invested for decades. Most of his wealth came later in life, not from dramatic wins, but from patience. The biggest mistake investors make is trying to earn the highest possible returns instead of sustainable returns they can stick with. Consistency beats intensity. Longevity beats brilliance. Compounding rewards patience and punishes impatience. It does not require genius, only discipline and time. While compounding is often introduced in textbooks as a mathematical curiosity, Housel emphasizes that its true power is psychological, practical, and world-changing. Small, consistent actions over time lead to extraordinary outcomes, often in ways that defy intuition. Housel begins by comparing financial compounding to natural phenomena, particularly ice ages. Scientists studying the Earth discovered that massive ice sheets formed not because of sudden massive events, but because small accumulations compounded over time. A thin layer of snow that didn't melt over a cool summer could, over decades and centuries, accumulate into miles-thick ice. The force that seemed enormous was, in reality, the product of patient, incremental growth repeated over time. This metaphor introduces the central idea. Big results almost never come from a single dramatic action. In finance, as in nature, small advantages, when allowed to compound consistently, lead to outsized outcomes. Compounding is deceptively powerful because its effects are not linear, they are exponential. The impact is slow at first, almost invisible, and then suddenly enormous. Housel illustrates compounding in finance with the story of Warren Buffett. Buffett is widely celebrated as one of the greatest investors of all time, but Housel emphasizes that Buffett's real advantage is not just skill, it is time. Buffett began investing seriously at the age of 10 and has been compounding wealth for over 70 years. His extraordinary net worth, over $84 billion, comes largely from decades of consistent, patient investing, rather than extraordinary annual returns alone. To highlight the math of compounding, Housel contrasts Buffett with Jim Simons, founder of Renaissance Technologies, who has consistently earned around 66% annually on his hedge fund. While Simons's returns far exceed Buffett's percentage-wise, he started much later and has had fewer years to compound. As a result, Simons's net worth, impressive as it is at $21 billion, is far less than Buffett's. The lesson: time is the most critical ingredient in compounding. Even modest returns sustained over decades outpace massive short-term gains. The chapter stresses that compounding works best when it is sustainable. High returns that cannot be maintained through excessive risk or over-leverage often collapse. In contrast, boring but consistent returns create wealth that grows invisibly until it becomes immense. Housel reminds readers that most people underestimate the power of compounding because human intuition is linear, not exponential. We are trained to think in terms of simple additions, 8 plus 8 plus 8, rather than exponential growth, 8 times 8 times 8. Housel also highlights that compounding applies beyond money. Knowledge, relationships, and reputation all grow the same way. Small, repeated actions lead to extraordinary long-term results. Writing a single page a day, investing a small sum regularly, or making small acts of kindness repeatedly will, over years, yield outcomes that appear disproportionate to the initial effort. Yet most people fail to appreciate this because the early gains are nearly invisible. The chapter contrasts compounding with human impatience. People often chase quick returns or seek dramatic gains, failing to appreciate the slow, steady process that leads to lasting success. Housel uses Buffett's early investment in Berkshire Hathaway as an example. Buffett's investment returned only a few % per year initially. It was the patience to let decades of compounding work its magic that turned a modest stake into a fortune. Investors who abandon strategies too early or overreact to short-term fluctuations frequently miss the compounding effect entirely. Housel also points out that luck and compounding intersect. Ronald Read, the janitor-turned-millionaire introduced in the book's introduction, illustrates this perfectly. Read saved diligently, invested modestly in blue-chip stocks, and then let time and compounding magnify those modest investments into over $8 million. Read didn't rely on huge returns, risky bets, or clever timing. He relied on patience, persistence, and the quiet power of exponential growth. Another dimension of compounding is the role of psychology. Compounding requires both patience and restraint. It is easy to disrupt its power through greed or panic. People who see their investments rise rapidly may take on excessive risk, while those who experience short-term losses may sell prematurely. In either case, impatience erodes the benefits of compounding. demonstrating that behavior is as important as the mathematics.
Housel also stresses that the most powerful effects of compounding are often invisible for a long time. People who don't see immediate results may give up, not realizing that the magic is building beneath the surface. This invisibility challenges our perception of effort and reward. Much like a snowflake accumulating into an ice sheet, compounding works silently, waiting for the right conditions, time, and patience to reveal its full magnitude. The chapter offers a practical takeaway: start early and stay consistent. Small contributions repeated over years can outweigh even the most aggressive short-term strategies. Compounding is not reserved for billionaires or financial geniuses. It works for anyone who begins early and maintains discipline. Housel also touches on a subtle but crucial point. Luck and compounding often look like skill in hindsight. People may attribute extraordinary wealth or success to genius or foresight, when in reality it is the result of patient, repeated actions magnified by compounding over time. Recognizing this distinction fosters humility and better decision-making, reducing overconfidence and the temptation to chase unsustainable risks. Finally, the chapter concludes with a moral and philosophical insight. Time is the most valuable currency in compounding. Money, knowledge, relationships, and reputation all benefit from long-term investment. Housel encourages readers to respect time, be patient, and avoid the temptation to trade short-term excitement for long-term results. The power of compounding rewards restraint, patience, and consistency far more than brilliance or audacity. Key lessons from Chapter 4. Small, consistent actions compound into extraordinary results over time. Time is often more important than high returns or skill. Human intuition struggles to grasp exponential growth, which is why compounding is often underestimated. Patience and discipline are critical. Disrupting compounding through impatience or risk undermines long-term success. Compounding applies beyond money. Knowledge, relationships, and reputation all grow the same way. Luck interacts with compounding. Small advantages or good timing can multiply quietly over decades. Recognizing the invisible power of compounding fosters humility and long-term thinking. In essence, Housel reframes wealth creation as a slow, quiet, and patient journey rather than a series of dramatic, high-stakes gambles. Compounding rewards those who understand its psychology and respect its timeline. Focus on strategies you can maintain for decades, not months. Chapter 5. Getting Wealthy versus Staying Wealthy addresses a distinction that many people overlook. The skills required to build wealth are not the same skills required to keep it. Morgan Housel argues that while wealth creation often demands optimism, risk-taking, and boldness, wealth preservation requires humility, caution, and a deep respect for uncertainty. Confusing these two phases is one of the most common causes of financial ruin. Housel opens with the observation that history is filled with people who got rich but did not stay rich. From business magnates to athletes to lottery winners, many individuals experience financial success only to lose it later. This pattern is not necessarily due to ignorance or lack of opportunity. It often results from applying the wrong mindset at the wrong stage. To explain this, Housel draws on the idea that getting wealthy requires taking risks, while staying wealthy requires avoiding them. Building wealth usually involves entrepreneurship, investing, innovation, or career bets that involve uncertainty. These activities reward optimism, the belief that the future will be better and that taking calculated risks will pay off. Staying wealthy, however, is a different game entirely. Once wealth exists, the primary goal shifts from growth to survival. At this stage, avoiding catastrophic loss matters more than chasing additional upside.
The risk tolerance that helped someone build wealth can become the very thing that destroys it if not adjusted. Housel reinforces this idea with a quote from investor Charlie Munger, who said, "The first rule of compounding is never interrupted unnecessarily." Interruptions often come from greed, overconfidence, or the desire to prove one's brilliance repeatedly. Many people feel pressure to keep winning, which leads to take risks they no longer need to take. A central theme in this chapter is the importance of survival. In finance, surviving long enough to benefit from compounding is often more important than achieving the highest possible returns. A strategy that delivers average returns consistently for decades will outperform a strategy that occasionally achieves spectacular gains, but eventually collapses. Housel introduces the concept of financial room for error. Because the future is unpredictable, building in a margin of safety is essential. This margin allows people to endure recessions, personal setbacks, health issues, and market crashes without being forced into irreversible decisions. One of the most powerful illustrations in the chapter comes from the aviation industry. Housel explains how airplanes are designed with massive safety margins. Engineers don't aim for just enough strength to fly. They design planes to withstand far more stress than they are ever expected to encounter. This redundancy accounts for unknowns, mistakes, and extreme scenarios. In finance, the same principle applies. You don't need to maximize efficiency, you need to maximize resilience. Housel also discusses how success itself increases risk. As people become wealthier, their lifestyles, expectations, and obligations grow. Fixed costs increase. Reputation and status become tied to financial performance. These pressures can make people less flexible and more vulnerable to downturns. Ironically, the more you have, the more you may feel you cannot afford to lose. Yet many people take even greater risks at this stage. This leads to another key insight. Reasonable expectations are a form of risk management. Many financial disasters occur because people anchor their plans to optimistic assumptions, high returns, stable markets, uninterrupted income. When reality deviates from these assumptions, they are forced to react under pressure.
Housel argues that a plan that works well in most scenarios is better than one that works perfectly in one scenario. This means accepting lower peak returns in exchange for greater durability. Staying wealthy is about playing defense, not offense. The chapter also introduces the idea that financial independence is fragile. It can be undone quickly by leverage, debt, or reliance on a narrow set of outcomes. Borrowing money amplifies both gains and losses, but losses often arrive faster and with greater force. Many people who lose wealth do so because leverage removes their margin of safety. Housel emphasizes that longevity is the ultimate goal. In markets and in life, the winners are often those who simply avoid ruin. This principle applies equally to individuals, businesses, and nations. The ability to endure shocks and setbacks is more valuable than the ability to grow rapidly. Another important point is that financial preservation often looks boring. It involves diversification, conservative spending, maintaining cash reserves, and resisting the temptation to chase trends. These behaviors rarely make headlines, but they quietly protect wealth over time. Housel also addresses the psychological difficulty of staying wealthy. Humans are wired for progress and growth. Standing still can feel like failure, even when it is the wisest choice. Many people struggle with the idea that once they have enough, the best move may be to stop taking big risks. Yet this restraint is precisely what allows wealth to endure. The chapter highlights how financial ruin often comes from a single decision, not a series of small mistakes. Leverage, speculation, and overconfidence can turn one misstep into permanent damage. This is why avoiding decisions that can wipe you out is so critical. Housel closes the chapter by emphasizing that staying wealthy is about humility.
accepting that you don't know what the future holds, that markets can behave irrationally, and that luck played a role in past success. Humility leads to caution, flexibility, and respect for risk. The ultimate lesson of Chapter 5 is clear. Getting wealthy is about optimism and risk-taking. Staying wealthy is about survival and risk avoidance. Confusing these two mindsets is one of the fastest ways to lose everything.
And this is the Rich Diary Podcast. If you love this content, please subscribe and share now. Mondays to Fridays, 12 p.m. each day.
Chapter 6, Tails You Win, focuses on an often overlooked truth about success, investing, and life. A small number of events often account for the majority of outcomes. Morgan Housel explains that in many fields, especially investing, a few tail events drive most of the results, while the majority of efforts produce modest or even disappointing outcomes. Understanding this reality changes how we think about failure, patience, and long-term strategy. Housel begins by introducing the idea of power law distributions, where results are not evenly spread. Instead of average outcomes clustering around the middle, a tiny fraction of outcomes dominate the total results. This is especially true in markets, entrepreneurship, and creative work. In investing, a handful of winning stocks can account for most of an investor's lifetime gains, while the majority made you little or even lose money. To illustrate this, Housel points to venture capital. Most startup investments fail or produce mediocre returns, but a small number, companies like Google, Amazon, or Facebook, generate returns so large that they more than compensate for all the losses. The entire model of venture capital depends on tolerating frequent failure in order to capture rare but massive success. This idea also applies to public markets. Housel cites research showing that a small percentage of companies are responsible for the majority of stock market gains over time. Most stocks underperform treasury bills over their lifetimes, yet the market as a whole grows because a few extraordinary performers drive the overall returns. The title Tails You Win reflects this asymmetry. In a typical probability distribution, the tails represent extreme outcomes, events that occur infrequently. In finance, these tail events are often responsible for enormous gains. If you position yourself to benefit from these rare events, you can win overall, even if most individual bets fail. Housel emphasizes that this reality contradicts human intuition. People expect effort to be evenly rewarded. They assume that good performance should be consistent and that failure indicates incompetence. In a world governed by power laws, however, frequent failure is normal, even necessary. This misunderstanding leads many people to abandon good strategies prematurely. An investor may give up on stocks after years of mediocre returns, not realizing that the payoff may come from a single future event. An entrepreneur may quit after several failed ventures, unaware that success often arrives suddenly after a long period of disappointment. Housel draws a parallel to Walt Disney's career. Before achieving legendary success, Disney experienced numerous failures. Several of his early businesses failed, and he was once fired for lacking creativity. Yet one extraordinary success, Disney Studios, dwarfed all previous failures. His legacy exists because of one massive tail event, not a series of steady wins. The chapter also references Amazon, which endured years of skepticism and financial losses. Many investors dismissed the company during its long stretch of low profits, yet those who held on through volatility were eventually rewarded when Amazon became one of the most valuable companies in the world. The gains from that single investment could outweigh countless mediocre ones. A critical lesson from this chapter is that long-term success requires endurance through periods of disappointment. Because tail events are rare, patience is essential. People who demand immediate results often exit just before the payoff arrives. Housel ties this idea back to personal investing behavior. He explains that market volatility is the price you pay for long-term returns. If investing were smooth and predictable, the returns would be far lower. The discomfort, uncertainty, and frequent disappointment are not bugs, they are features of the system. This reframing helps explain why many investors fail to capture long-term gains. They sell during downturns, abandon strategies after underperformance, or chase trends out of frustration. In doing so, they miss the rare events that make the entire journey worthwhile. Housel also discusses how over-optimizing for perfection can be counterproductive. Attempting to avoid every loss or mistake often means missing opportunities entirely. A strategy that accepts small losses in exchange for exposure to big wins is often more effective than one that seeks flawless performance. This concept extends beyond investing. In careers, creative pursuits, and personal growth, a few decisions or moments often define long-term outcomes. One job change, one connection, one idea, or one opportunity can outweigh years of incremental progress. Recognizing this encourages experimentation and resilience. The chapter challenges the idea that success should feel smooth or predictable. Instead, Housel suggests that success often feels like a long stretch of frustration punctuated by occasional breakthroughs. People who succeed are not those who avoid failure, but those who survive it long enough to encounter a tail event. Another key insight is that the absence of visible progress does not mean failure. In systems driven by power laws, results arrive unevenly. Measuring performance too frequently can distort perception and undermine confidence. Long-term thinking requires trusting the process, even when short-term feedback is discouraging. Housel also emphasizes the importance of diversification. Because it's impossible to predict which investments will become tail events, spreading bets increases the odds of capturing one. Diversification is not about avoiding risk, it's about ensuring exposure to potential outliers without being destroyed by failures. The chapter concludes by reinforcing a mindset shift. You don't need to be right most of the time to succeed. You just need to be right once in a big way and survive long enough to get there. This principle applies across investing, business, and life. The core message of Tails You Win is both liberating and demanding. It frees people from the pressure of constant success while demanding patience, resilience, and emotional endurance. Accepting uneven outcomes allows you to stay in the game long enough for compounding and luck to work in your favor.
Chapter 7. Freedom. This chapter explores what Morgan Housel considers the highest form of wealth, the ability to control your time. While money is often pursued for status, comfort, or security, Housel argues that its greatest and most meaningful value lies in the freedom it provides, the freedom to decide what you do, when you do it, and with whom you do it. Housel opens the chapter with a simple but profound observation. People don't want money as much as they want control over their lives. Money is merely the tool. The real prize is autonomy, the ability to shape your days according to your values rather than external demands. He defines freedom as independence, the ability to wake up in the morning and choose how to spend your time. This doesn't necessarily mean quitting work or living without responsibility. It means having options. It means not being forced into decisions by financial pressure, fear, or desperation. Housel emphasizes that freedom is deeply psychological. Two people with the same income and net worth can feel vastly different levels of freedom depending on their obligations, spending habits, and mindset. Someone earning a high salary but living paycheck to paycheck may feel trapped, while someone earning far less but with low expenses and savings may feel free. This leads to a critical insight. Freedom has little to do with how much you earn and everything to do with how much control you retain. Income creates potential, but spending determines reality. The more you commit future income to fixed obligations, mortgages, car payments, lifestyle inflation, the less freedom you have, regardless of how impressive your paycheck looks. Housel introduces the concept of time optionality. This is the ability to decide when and how to work. People with time optionality can leave toxic jobs, say no to unreasonable demands, take career risks, or pursue creative opportunities without panic. Those without it must comply, even when circumstances are unhealthy. The chapter highlights how modern work culture often undervalues time autonomy. Promotions, bonuses, and prestige are frequently tied to longer hours, constant availability, and stress. Society celebrates people who are busy, exhausted, and overcommitted, mistaking this for success. Yet these same rewards often strip away the very freedom money is supposed to provide. Housel points out a paradox. Many people sacrifice freedom in the pursuit of wealth, hoping to buy it back later, but life doesn't always cooperate. Health issues, burnout, family responsibilities, or unexpected events can derail plans. Delaying freedom too long can mean never fully experiencing it. He contrasts this with people who prioritize freedom earlier in life, even at the cost of slower financial growth. While they may accumulate less wealth, they gain something harder to replace: control over their time during their healthiest and most energetic years. A central theme in the chapter is that having enough money is what unlocks freedom, not having the most money possible. Once basic needs and a margin of safety are met, additional income yields diminishing returns in terms of happiness and autonomy. Beyond that point, more money often comes with more responsibility, pressure, and expectation. Housel reinforces this idea with a quote from author Derek Sivers, who defines success as the ability to wake up in the morning and decide what to do. This definition reframes wealth as a lifestyle choice rather than a numerical goal. The chapter also explores how fear undermines freedom. People who lack savings or financial buffers are often forced to make decisions based on short-term survival rather than long-term well-being. They may stay in jobs they hate, tolerate unhealthy environments, or abandon meaningful goals because they cannot afford uncertainty. This is where Housel connects freedom to financial independence. Saving money is not just about future consumption, it's about reducing dependence on others. Each dollar saved increases your ability to make decisions on your own terms. In this sense, savings represent stored freedom. Housel explains that savings buy options, and options are incredibly valuable in an unpredictable world. The future rarely unfolds according to plan. People who have flexibility can adapt. Those who don't are trapped by their commitments. He also discusses how freedom changes motivation. When people work because they choose to, not because they must, work becomes more meaningful and creative. Autonomy increases satisfaction, productivity, and resilience. This aligns with psychological research showing that control over one's time is one of the strongest predictors of happiness. Importantly, Housel does not romanticize freedom as laziness or escape from responsibility. Instead, he frames it as alignment, the ability to direct effort toward what truly matters. Many people who achieve financial independence continue to work, but they do so on their own terms. The chapter addresses a subtle danger: confusing consumption with freedom. Buying expensive items, luxury experiences, or status symbols can feel empowering, but they often increase dependency by raising fixed costs. True freedom usually looks quieter: lower expenses, fewer obligations, and more margin for error. Housel argues that the most powerful use of money is to lower the amount of future income you depend on. When your lifestyle requires less, your freedom expands. This is why modest living paired with savings can be more liberating than high income paired with high expenses. The chapter concludes with a compelling reframing of wealth. Money's greatest dividend is freedom, not pleasure or prestige. Pleasure fades quickly, and prestige is fragile. Freedom, however, compounds over time, shaping how you experience every day of your life. The ultimate lesson of Chapter 7 is clear and deeply human. The
The best thing money can buy is control over your time. When you use money to build flexibility, independence, and choice, it serves its highest purpose.
Chapter 8, The Man in the Car Paradox. Chapter 8, The Man in the Car Paradox, explores how status, wealth, and admiration are often misunderstood, leading people to pursue things that fail to deliver the emotional rewards they expect. Morgan Housel explains that much of what people chase financially, luxury, recognition, and symbols of success, is driven by a desire for respect and validation, yet these pursuits rarely achieve their intended goal. The chapter's title comes from a simple observation. When you see a man driving a luxury car, you rarely admire the man, you admire the car. The owner believes the car will earn them respect, envy, or admiration. In reality, observers focus on what the car represents for themselves, not on the person driving it. The symbol overshadows the individual. This paradox highlights a fundamental misunderstanding about how people perceive wealth. We assume others will judge us by our possessions, but in reality, people are too busy thinking about themselves. The admiration we seek through displays of wealth is often misplaced because the attention never lands where we expect it to. Housel expands this idea by explaining that status is relational, not absolute. A luxury item only feels special in comparison to what others have. But because comparison is endless, status gained through possessions is fleeting. There is always a bigger house, a newer car, a more exclusive experience. The moment someone else has more, the feeling of superiority evaporates. This leads to a cycle of consumption driven not by utility or happiness, but by social signaling. People buy expensive things to signal success, competence, or importance. Yet the signal is often misinterpreted or ignored. Observers don't think that person must be admirable. They think, I wish I had that. Housel expands this idea by explaining that status is rooted in human psychology. We use possessions as shortcuts to evaluate success because they are visible. Internal qualities, kindness, intelligence, integrity, freedom, are harder to observe. As a result, society often overvalues what can be seen and undervalues what truly matters. The chapter also addresses how wealthy people are often misunderstood. Many assume that rich people spend lavishly and flaunt their success. In reality, some of the wealthiest people are those who don't look wealthy at all. They drive modest cars, live in average homes, and avoid conspicuous consumption. Their wealth is hidden precisely because it has not been spent. Housel emphasizes a critical distinction. Wealth is what you don't see. A luxury car, designer clothes, or a large house represent money that has already been spent. The real power of wealth lies in the money that remains invested, saved, and available for future choices. Spending money to look wealthy often reduces actual wealth. The paradox deepens when Housel explores how status-seeking can undermine long-term financial security. When people prioritize appearing successful, they may overspend, take on debt, or sacrifice savings. This can lead to financial fragility, anxiety, and loss of freedom, the very things money is supposed to prevent. Housel also highlights how envy fuels poor financial decisions. Seeing others display wealth triggers a desire to keep up, even when doing so conflicts with personal goals. Social media amplifies this effect by presenting curated images of success that rarely reflect reality. The result is a constant sense of inadequacy and pressure to perform financially.
Another key insight is that respect and admiration are earned through behavior, not possessions. People admire generosity, humility, competence, and independence far more than flashy displays of wealth. Yet these qualities are subtle and take time to develop, making them less attractive than quick status symbols. Housel argues that the desire for status is natural, not shameful. Humans are social creatures who care about how they are perceived. The problem arises when we pursue status through the wrong channels. Buying things to impress others is an inefficient and often counterproductive way to earn respect. He reframes the concept of success by emphasizing invisible achievements, financial security, low stress, flexibility, and strong relationships. These outcomes rarely attract attention, but they significantly improve quality of life. The paradox is that the most admirable forms of success often go unnoticed. The chapter also discusses how humility can be a financial advantage. People who don't feel the need to prove themselves are less likely to overspend, take unnecessary risks, or compare themselves endlessly to others. Humility allows for better long-term decisions and greater emotional peace. Housel ties the paradox back to freedom. Spending money to impress others often increases dependence and reduces autonomy. In contrast, saving and investing quietly builds independence. The person driving the luxury car may appear successful, but the person who doesn't need to impress anyone may be far freer. The chapter concludes with a powerful reminder. People don't care about your possessions as much as you think they do. Chasing admiration through material displays is a losing game because the reward is illusory. True satisfaction comes from aligning financial decisions with personal values rather than external validation. The core lesson of the man in the car paradox is simple yet profound. Using money to gain respect is often ineffective, but using money to gain freedom is deeply fulfilling. When you stop trying to impress others, you free yourself to build a life that actually works for you.
And this is the Rich Diary Podcast. If you love this content, please subscribe and share now. Mondays to Fridays, 12 p.m. each day.
Chapter 9. Wealth is what you don't see. True wealth is invisible. Morgan Housel argues that many people misunderstand what wealth actually is, confusing it with the outward signs of spending rather than the quiet accumulation of financial security, flexibility, and independence. Housel begins by drawing a clear distinction between being rich and being wealthy. Being rich is visible. It's income, expensive possessions, luxury lifestyles, and public signals of success. Being wealthy, on the other hand, is hidden. It is money saved, invested, and left untouched. Wealth is the absence of consumption. It is what remains after you choose not to spend. This distinction matters because society overwhelmingly rewards and celebrates what can be seen. Expensive cars, large homes, and luxury experiences are easy to admire. Savings accounts, investment portfolios, and low financial stress are not. As a result, people often chase the appearance of wealth rather than the substance of it. Housel emphasizes a simple but uncomfortable truth. Spending money to show how much money you have is the fastest way to have less money. Every visible symbol of success represents money that can no longer provide future security or freedom. The irony is that the more someone tries to look wealthy, the less wealthy they often are. To illustrate this, Housel revisits the story of Ronald Read, the janitor and gas station attendant who died with over $8 million. Read lived modestly, drove an old car, and wore simple clothes. Nothing about his appearance suggested wealth, yet he was far wealthier than many high-income professionals who spent most of what they earned. His wealth existed precisely because it was not spent. This example challenges the assumption that wealth must look impressive. In reality, wealth often looks like restraint. It looks like saying no when you could say yes. It looks like living below your means even when your income rises. Housel also highlights how invisible success can be psychologically difficult. Humans crave recognition and validation. Saving money, avoiding lifestyle inflation, and delaying gratification offer little immediate reward. There are no compliments for not buying something, no applause for investing quietly. This lack of feedback makes invisible success harder to pursue. Yet this invisibility is exactly what makes wealth powerful. Money that hasn't been spent is flexible. It can absorb shocks, fund opportunities, and buy time. Money that has been converted into lifestyle cannot do these things. The chapter introduces a critical concept. Wealth is optionality. It gives you choices. You can change jobs, start a business, move cities, take time off, or handle emergencies without panic. These options don't announce themselves to the world, but they fundamentally change how you experience life. Housel contrasts this with people who appear successful but live with financial fragility. High income paired with high expenses creates dependence. These individuals may look impressive, but they often have little margin for error. A job loss, market downturn, or health issue can quickly become catastrophic. This leads to another key idea. The gap between what you see and what you don't see explains why judging wealth is so difficult. You can see someone's house, car, or clothes, but you cannot see their savings rate, debt, stress level, or financial resilience. This makes external comparisons misleading and dangerous. Housel warns that envy thrives in this gap. People compare their behind-the-scenes reality to others' highlight reels. They assume that visible consumption equals success without accounting for what may be happening financially behind the curtain. This fuels unnecessary spending and dissatisfaction.
The chapter also explores the role of frugality, reframing it not as deprivation but as a strategic choice. Frugality is not about living cheaply. It is about valuing future flexibility over present display. It is choosing what you care about and cutting back on what you don't. Housel makes it clear that frugality does not mean avoiding all spending. Instead, it means spending intentionally. Some people may happily spend on travel, education, or experiences while saving aggressively in other areas. The key is that spending aligns with personal values, not social pressure. Another important insight is that wealth grows quietly but disappears loudly. Financial setbacks, bankruptcies, foreclosures, forced lifestyle downgrades are often sudden and visible. Wealth accumulation, by contrast, is slow and invisible. This asymmetry distorts perception, making it easier to notice failure than success. Housel also ties this idea back to long-term thinking. Building invisible wealth requires patience and trust in delayed outcomes. It means resisting the urge to convert future security into present pleasure. This trade-off is uncomfortable but essential. The chapter emphasizes that financial independence is built through the gap between income and expenses. What you save matters far more than what you earn. Someone with a modest income and high savings rate can build more wealth and more freedom than someone with a high income and high spending. Housel challenges readers to reconsider their definition of success. Instead of asking, "What do I want to own?" he suggests asking, "What kind of life do I want to protect?" Wealth is the buffer that protects your values, your time, and your choices. The chapter closes with a powerful reframing. Wealth is the thing that lets you sleep at night. It reduces anxiety, increases confidence, and provides resilience. These benefits are invisible to others, but deeply felt by the person who has them. The core lesson of Chapter 9 is clear and transformative. Wealth is not about what you can show, it's about what you don't have to worry about. When you stop trying to look rich and start focusing on building invisible security, money begins to serve its most meaningful purpose.
Chapter 10. Save Money. The chapter distills one of the simplest yet most misunderstood principles in personal finance. Saving is more important than earning a high return. Morgan Housel argues that while investment strategies, market timing, and optimization receive most of the attention, the foundation of financial success is far more basic and far more behavioral, the ability to consistently save. Housel opens the chapter by challenging the obsession with investment performance. Many people spend enormous energy searching for higher returns, smarter strategies, or market-beating techniques, yet this focus often distracts from the single variable most within their control, their savings rate. You cannot control market returns, economic cycles, or interest rates, but you can control how much of your income you save.
A central argument in this chapter is that saving is not the result of a specific income level. People at nearly every income level can save, and many high earners fail to do so. The difference is not income, it is behavior and expectations. As income rises, expectations tend to rise just as quickly, consuming any financial progress. Housel emphasizes that the value of saving is not just future consumption. Saving is about creating distance between your present self and future uncertainty. It is a buffer against surprises, a source of options, and a defense against desperation. Each dollar saved increases flexibility and reduces reliance on any single outcome. One of the most powerful ideas in the chapter is that saving is what's left over after spending, not what's left over after investing. People often frame saving as something they'll do once they've optimized investments or earned more money. In reality, saving comes first. It is the seed that makes all future financial growth possible. Housel reframes saving as a psychological skill rather than a financial one. It requires resisting lifestyle inflation, managing expectations, and becoming comfortable with having less than you could. This discomfort is temporary, but the benefits compound over time. He introduces a subtle but important point. Saving is the gap between ego and income. When people tie their self-worth to consumption or status, saving becomes difficult. When ego grows alongside income, there is nothing left to save. Humility, therefore, becomes a financial advantage. Housel also explains that a high savings rate can compensate for many financial mistakes. Someone who saves consistently doesn't need to perfectly time the market, pick the best stocks, or maximize every return. Even mediocre investment returns can lead to meaningful wealth if savings are strong and consistent. This idea flips conventional wisdom. Rather than asking, how can I earn higher returns, Housel suggests asking, how can I save more? The latter question is often easier to answer and far more reliable. The chapter discusses how saving buys time, which is one of the most underrated financial assets. Time allows you to wait out market downturns, recover from mistakes, and benefit from compounding. People who live paycheck to paycheck are often forced into short-term thinking, making decisions under pressure that undermine long-term goals. Housel connects saving to freedom and independence, echoing themes from earlier chapters. Savings reduce dependence on employers, clients, markets, and even the economy. With savings, you can walk away from bad situations, negotiate from a position of strength, and make choices aligned with your values. Importantly, Housel clarifies that saving does not mean hoarding money out of fear. The goal is not deprivation, but resilience. Saving is about creating a stable base from which you can take thoughtful risks. Ironically, those who save the most are often the ones best positioned to pursue meaningful opportunities. The chapter also touches on the diminishing returns of income. Beyond a certain point, earning more money does little to improve quality of life if spending rises in parallel. Saving, however, continues to provide benefits regardless of income level because it increases security and optionality. Housel challenges the idea that financial success requires extreme discipline or sacrifice. Instead, he advocates for moderate, sustainable savings habits that can be maintained over decades. Consistency matters far more than intensity. He also warns against overconfidence in financial projections. Plans based on perfect assumptions, steady income, strong markets, uninterrupted careers, are fragile. Saving creates slack that absorbs deviations from the plan. Slack is not inefficiency, it is insurance. Another key insight is that financial independence is achieved by controlling expenses, not maximizing income. Many people underestimate how powerful expense control can be. Reducing spending lowers the amount of income required to sustain a lifestyle, which in turn increases freedom. Housel encourages readers to redefine wealth accumulation as the practice of patience and self-control. The act of saving may feel uneventful, but its impact is profound. Over time, it creates stability, confidence, and opportunity. The chapter closes with a reminder that saving is a habit, not a milestone. It is not something you do once you reach a certain income or life stage. It is a lifelong practice that evolves with your circumstances.
Even small amounts saved consistently can grow into meaningful resources when combined with time and discipline. The core lesson of Save Money is straightforward but transformative. The ability to save is the foundation of all financial success. It matters more than intelligence, timing, or market knowledge. When you save, you give yourself time, freedom, and resilience. Three things money is truly meant to provide.
Chapter 11, Reasonable Greater Than Rational, addresses a subtle but crucial truth about money. The best financial decisions are not always the most mathematically optimal. They are the ones you can stick with. Morgan Housel argues that in real life, reasonable behavior consistently outperforms rational behavior because money decisions are made by emotional humans, not emotionless calculators. Housel opens the chapter by challenging how traditional finance defines rationality. In textbooks, rational decisions are those that maximize expected returns based on probabilities and data. But in the real world, decisions are filtered through fear, stress, hope, regret, and uncertainty. A strategy that looks perfect on paper can fail if it causes anxiety, sleepless nights, or panic-driven abandonment. This leads to the chapter's central thesis. A reasonable plan you can follow for decades is more powerful than a rational plan you abandon during stress. Housel explains that in finance, people assume people are perfectly rational actors, but behavioral psychology shows otherwise. Humans are not wired to optimize, we are wired to survive. When faced with uncertainty, emotional comfort often matters more than mathematical precision. For example, a fully invested portfolio might offer higher expected returns than one that includes cash. From a rational perspective, holding cash may seem inefficient, but from a reasonable perspective, cash provides psychological safety. It allows people to endure market volatility without panicking. If holding some cash prevents you from selling at the worst possible time, it may lead to better long-term results, even if it slightly reduces theoretical returns. Housel emphasizes that the biggest investing risk is not volatility, it's quitting. Many people fail not because they chose poor strategies, but because they abandoned good ones during emotional stress. Reasonable strategies account for human behavior and create conditions that encourage persistence. He uses the example of people who sold stocks during major market crashes. Rationally, staying invested was the correct move, but emotionally, fear dominated. Those who had strategies aligned with their emotional tolerance, less leverage, more diversification, some cash, were more likely to stay invested and ultimately benefit from the recovery. The chapter highlights an important idea. Financial success requires endurance, not brilliance. You don't need to make perfect decisions, you need to avoid catastrophic mistakes and stay in the game. Reasonable behavior helps people do that. Housel also discusses how different people have different definitions of reasonable, and that's okay. A young investor with a stable income may reasonably tolerate more risk than someone nearing retirement. What matters is not following a universal optimal strategy, but following one that fits your personality, goals, and emotional limits. He points out that many financial debates miss this nuance. Arguments over whether to invest aggressively, hold cash, or diversify often assume there is one correct answer. In reality, the best answer is the one that aligns with your behavior under stress. Housel introduces the idea that people want just enough return to feel confident, not the maximum possible return. The desire for emotional comfort is not irrational, it is human. Ignoring this leads to strategies that look good on spreadsheets but fail in practice. The chapter also explores how fear of regret influences decision-making. People often avoid reasonable choices because they fear missing out on potential gains. Yet regret from missing gains is often less damaging than regret from irreversible losses. Reasonable decisions prioritize survival over optimization. Housel reinforces this with a powerful example: leverage.
Using leverage can dramatically increase returns in good times, making it rational from a purely mathematical perspective. But leverage also increases the chance of ruin. Reasonable investors avoid leverage because the cost of failure is too high, even if the expected returns look attractive.
Another key insight is that reasonable behavior creates consistency, and consistency enables compounding. Compounding only works if you remain invested long enough. Strategies that cause emotional distress disrupt compounding and undermine long-term success. Housel also ties this idea to personal life decisions. People often choose careers, lifestyles, or financial goals that look impressive but feel exhausting. Over time, burnout leads to abandonment. Reasonable paths, those that align with personal values and energy, are more sustainable and often more successful in the long run. The chapter encourages readers to give themselves permission to be reasonable. You don't need to chase every opportunity, maximize every return, or follow the smartest strategy in the room. You need a plan that feels right enough to stick with through uncertainty. Housel reframes success as behavioral consistency over time, not intellectual superiority. This perspective reduces stress and improves outcomes by aligning decisions with human nature. The chapter closes with a powerful reminder: there is no single correct way to manage money. There is only what works for you over the long run. Reasonable decisions account for emotions, uncertainty, and personal limits. Rational decisions ignore them and often fail as a result. The core lesson of reasonable greater than rational is deeply practical. Doing what you can live with beats doing what looks best on paper. When money decisions support emotional endurance, they unlock the real power of patience, compounding, and long-term thinking.
And this is the Rich Diary Podcast. If you love this content, please subscribe and share now. Mondays to Fridays, 12 p.m. each day.
Chapter 12. Surprise. The chapter focuses on one of the most underestimated forces shaping financial outcomes. The future is driven by events we cannot predict. Morgan Housel argues that history, and by extension financial success, is not a smooth, logical progression, but a series of surprises. Because of this, planning based solely on past patterns or precise forecasts is fragile. The smartest financial strategies are those that accept uncertainty and are built to survive it. Housel opens the chapter by challenging the way people study history. We often analyze past events to understand cause and effect, believing that careful study can help us predict the future. While history is useful, it has a major flaw. It only shows what happened, not what could have happened. It excludes near misses, alternate outcomes, and paths that were almost taken. This creates a distorted view of reality. When we look backward, outcomes appear inevitable and logical, but when people lived through those moments, the future was unclear and filled with competing possibilities. History feels tidy only because uncertainty has been erased by hindsight. Housel explains that survivorship bias plays a major role in this distortion. We study the companies, investors, and strategies that survived while ignoring the countless ones that failed or never emerged. This leads to overconfidence in patterns that appear reliable but were actually shaped by chance. He gives the example of technological progress. It's easy to look back and assume that today's dominant technologies were destined to succeed. In reality, many competing innovations existed, and the winners were often determined by unpredictable factors: timing, regulation, consumer behavior, or random events. This unpredictability is why Housel cautions against relying too heavily on detailed forecasts. Forecasts assume that future conditions will resemble the past in meaningful ways. But the most impactful events are often unprecedented. Wars, pandemics, financial crises, and technological breakthroughs tend to arrive unexpectedly and reshape the world in ways no model anticipates. Housel emphasizes that the biggest financial events are surprises by definition. If they were predictable, they would already be priced into markets. Market crashes, bubbles, and booms catch people off guard precisely because they defy consensus expectations. The chapter also highlights how human progress accelerates through unpredictable bursts, not steady improvement. Many of the most transformative changes in history, electricity, the internet, smartphones, had effects far beyond what early observers imagined. Likewise, negative surprises can undo decades of progress in a short time. Housel introduces the idea that planning should focus less on predicting specific outcomes and more on preparing for a wide range of possibilities. Instead of asking, "What will happen next?" a better question is, "What might happen and how can I survive if it does?" This mindset shift has profound implications for money management. It encourages diversification, conservative assumptions, and margins of safety. It discourages overconfidence, leverage, and strategies that rely on precise timing. Housel also discusses how overfitting to the past can be dangerous. Investors often design strategies that perform exceptionally well under historical conditions, but fail when conditions change. This happens because the future rarely repeats the past exactly. What worked before may stop working without warning. Another key insight in the chapter is that people underestimate how much the world can change in a short period of time. Long stretches of stability can lull people into complacency, leading them to assume that current trends will continue indefinitely. When surprise arrives, those assumptions collapse. Housel ties this idea back to earlier chapters on risk and survival. Because surprises are inevitable, the goal is not to eliminate risk, but to avoid decisions that leave no room for error. Strategies that depend on everything going right are especially vulnerable to surprise. He emphasizes that flexibility is one of the most valuable financial traits. People and institutions that can adapt quickly are better equipped to handle unexpected events. Flexibility often comes from low debt, diversified income, cash reserves, and modest expectations. The chapter also explores how stories about the future are seductive but unreliable. Humans crave narratives that explain where the world is heading. These stories provide comfort and clarity, but they often oversimplify reality. When reality diverges from the story, as it inevitably does, people are caught unprepared. Housel argues that humility is essential when dealing with the future. Acknowledging that we don't know what will happen allows us to plan more realistically. Overconfidence in forecasts leads to brittle systems that break under pressure. He illustrates this with investing behavior. Many investors anchor their plans to specific return targets or timelines. When reality fails to match those expectations, frustration and panic follow. More flexible plans, those built around ranges rather than exact numbers, are more resilient. Another important point is that progress often looks slow until it suddenly isn't. Just as compounding works quietly before producing dramatic results, change often builds beneath the surface before becoming visible. This makes both positive and negative surprises more likely. Housel concludes the chapter by emphasizing that the most important financial skill is not intelligence, forecasting, or precision, it's adaptability. Those who accept surprise as a permanent feature of life are better prepared to navigate it. The core lesson of surprise is clear and sobering. The future will not unfold according to plan. Financial success comes not from predicting the future accurately, but from building strategies that can endure and adapt when the future inevitably surprises us.
Chapter 13, Room for Error, focuses on one of the most practical and life-saving principles in personal finance. Always leave margin for error. Morgan Housel argues that because the future is unpredictable and mistakes are inevitable, success depends less on being right and more on not being wiped out when you're wrong. Housel begins by revisiting a theme that runs throughout the book. Uncertainty is permanent. No amount of intelligence, experience, or planning can eliminate risk. What matters is how exposed you are when uncertainty shows up.
People and systems that leave no room for mistakes are fragile. Those that build in slack are resilient. He introduces the concept of margin of safety, borrowed from engineering and investing. Engineers design bridges, airplanes, and buildings to withstand far more stress than they are expected to encounter. This extra capacity is not waste. It is what prevents disaster when unexpected forces arise. Financial planning, Housel argues, should follow the same principle. In money, room for error takes many forms: savings, low debt, diversification, conservative assumptions, and flexibility. These buffers allow people to survive bad luck, market downturns, job losses, health issues, and mistakes without permanent damage. Housel emphasizes that most financial catastrophes are not caused by lack of intelligence, but by overconfidence. People assume the future will resemble the past, that income will continue uninterrupted, and that markets will behave within familiar ranges. When reality deviates from these assumptions, those with no margin for error are forced into desperate decisions. The Housel chapter highlights how optimism without room for error is dangerous. Optimism drives progress, but when plans rely entirely on best-case scenarios, they become fragile. A plan that only works if everything goes right is not a plan, it's a gamble. Housel uses the example of personal debt to illustrate this point. Borrowing money can accelerate growth in good times, but it eliminates flexibility. Debt requires fixed payments regardless of circumstances. When income falls or expenses rise unexpectedly, debt turns small problems into crises. This is why Housel consistently warns against leverage. Leverage magnifies both gains and losses, but losses arrive faster and with more force. People who use leverage often assume they can exit before things go wrong. History shows this confidence is usually misplaced. Housel also discusses how time itself is a margin of safety. Long time horizons allow you to wait out downturns, recover from mistakes, and benefit from compounding. Short time horizons increase vulnerability because there is no room for recovery. This is why investing money you may need soon is especially risky. Another key insight is that the more certain you are about something, the less room for error you tend to leave. Confidence encourages precision, tight timelines, exact return expectations, full deployment of resources. Ironically, this is when caution is most needed. Uncertainty demands slack, not precision. Housel connects room for error to behavioral endurance. Financial plans that stretch people emotionally are more likely to fail. Buffers reduce stress, making it easier to stay disciplined during difficult periods. This emotional margin is just as important as the financial one. He also explains how success can reduce room for error. As people accumulate wealth, prestige, or responsibility, they may take on more obligations, bigger lifestyles, reputational risks, and financial commitments. These reduce flexibility and increase the cost of mistakes. Ironically, success can make people more fragile. Housel reinforces that survival is the foundation of all long-term success. Compounding, opportunity, and growth only matter if you're still standing. Avoiding ruin is more important than achieving peak performance. The chapter introduces a practical rule of thumb: plan for outcomes that are worse than you expect. This doesn't mean being pessimistic, it means being realistic. Assuming that things will go slightly worse than planned creates resilience. Assuming perfection creates vulnerability. Housel also highlights how financial freedom is closely tied to margin of safety. People with savings and low obligations have the freedom to adapt, wait, and choose. Those without buffers are forced to react, often under pressure. Another important takeaway is that room for error is invisible but invaluable. It doesn't produce flashy returns or impressive appearances, but it quietly prevents disaster. Like insurance, its value is only obvious when things go wrong. The chapter closes by emphasizing that many of the best financial decisions look inefficient in the short term. Holding cash, avoiding leverage, diversifying broadly, and accepting lower returns may seem suboptimal. In reality, they create durability, the ability to endure surprises. The core lesson of room for error is both simple and profound. The most important goal in finance is to stay in the game. Leaving room for error ensures that mistakes, bad luck, and surprises do not become fatal. When you respect uncertainty and build buffers, you give yourself the best chance to succeed over the long run.
And this is the Rich Diary Podcast. If you love this content, please subscribe and share now. Mondays to Fridays, 12 p.m. each day.
Chapter 14, You'll Change, explores a deeply human truth that is often ignored in financial planning. The person you are today is not the person you will be in the future. Morgan Housel argues that many financial mistakes happen not because people plan poorly, but because they assume their current goals, values, and preferences will remain stable over time. In reality, change is inevitable, and failing to account for it can quietly derail even the most thoughtful plans. Housel opens the chapter by highlighting how confidently people predict their future selves. We choose careers, homes, investments, and lifestyles based on what we believe we will want years or decades from now. Yet history shows that people change more than they expect, and they often underestimate how different their future selves will be. He introduces the concept of end-of-history illusion, a psychological bias where people recognize that they've changed significantly in the past, but believe they will change very little in the future. In other words, we think we've reached a finished version of ourselves. This illusion makes long-term commitments feel safer than they really are. Housel explains that this bias affects everything from marriage and career choices to spending habits and investment decisions. A lifestyle that feels exciting and motivating at 30 may feel exhausting or meaningless at 50. A career goal that once defined your identity may lose its appeal after a few major life events. The danger arises when financial decisions lock future versions of ourselves into commitments they may not want. Large mortgages, inflexible careers, high fixed expenses, or illiquid investments can limit options later in life. When preferences change, as they almost always do, these commitments become burdens rather than achievements. Housel emphasizes that long-term planning is not about predicting the future perfectly, but about preserving flexibility. The smartest financial plans leave room for personal evolution. They acknowledge that goals will shift, priorities will change, and life will introduce unexpected desires and constraints. One of the chapter's most important insights is that many people chase goals that align with who they are today, not who they'll become. Ambition, status, and growth often dominate early adulthood. Over time, people tend to value stability, autonomy, health, and relationships more. Financial plans that fail to adapt to this shift often lead to regret. Housel discusses how regret is often the cost of irreversible decisions made under outdated assumptions. When people feel trapped by past choices, dissatisfaction grows, not because the original decision was foolish, but because circumstances and values evolved. He also highlights how flexibility reduces the emotional cost of change. People with savings, low fixed costs, and diversified options can pivot when their interests change. Those without flexibility are forced to either suppress change or absorb painful consequences. The chapter connects this idea to investing. Long-term investments are essential, but overcommitting to rigid strategies can backfire if personal circumstances shift. A plan that looks optimal on paper may become emotionally unsustainable if life changes, such as family needs, health concerns, or career transitions. Housel argues that the most valuable financial asset is the ability to change your mind. This requires liquidity, optionality, and a margin of safety. Money locked into narrow paths reduces freedom. Money kept flexible preserves it. Another key point is that happiness often comes from alignment, not achievement. Achieving goals that no longer resonate can feel hollow. People who succeed by external standards sometimes feel unfulfilled because their internal values evolved along the way. Housel reframes this not as failure, but as growth. Changing your mind is not quitting, it's adapting. Financial systems that treat change as a problem instead of a feature are inherently flawed. He encourages readers to plan in ways that forgive future mistakes. This means avoiding decisions that demand lifelong commitment to a single version of success. It means choosing paths that can be adjusted rather than optimized once and locked forever. The chapter also discusses how time changes risk tolerance. Younger individuals may tolerate volatility and uncertainty more easily, while older individuals may prioritize security and predictability. Plans that don't evolve with these shifts can create stress and poor decision-making. Housel points out that many of life's biggest changes are unpredictable. Parenthood, health issues, personal loss, or new passions can dramatically alter priorities. Because these changes are difficult to forecast, flexibility becomes more valuable than precision. The chapter concludes with a gentle but powerful reminder. You don't need to plan for a perfect future, you need to plan for change itself. Financial success comes from building systems that adapt as you do. The core lesson of You'll Change is liberating and compassionate. It's okay to change your goals, redefine success, and revise your plans. Money should support who you are becoming, not trap you in who you used to be.
Chapter 15, Nothing's Free, confronts a deceptively simple truth that many people resist. Every financial reward comes with a price, and that price is often psychological rather than monetary. Morgan Housel argues that the biggest mistake people make with money is not failing to earn high returns, but failing to recognize the hidden costs that come with them. Housel opens the chapter by reframing how we think about investing returns. People often ask, what's the best return I can get? But a better question is, what price am I willing to pay? Because returns are never free. They demand patience, emotional endurance, uncertainty, volatility, and discomfort. The problem is that many of these costs are invisible up front. They don't appear in spreadsheets or marketing materials. Instead, they show up during moments of fear, boredom, regret, and doubt, when sticking to a plan becomes hardest. Housel introduces one of the chapter's central metaphors. Market returns are rented, not owned. You don't buy high returns outright, you rent them by enduring periods of pain. The rent is paid in volatility, uncertainty, and temporary losses. If you're unwilling to pay that rent, you won't earn the returns. This explains why long-term investing is so difficult despite being conceptually simple. Everyone wants the rewards, but few are willing to tolerate the costs. When the bill arrives, often during market downturns, many people panic and exit, forfeiting the very returns they were chasing. Housel emphasizes that volatility is not a fine for doing something wrong. It is the admission price for long-term gains. Markets fluctuate because uncertainty exists. If returns were smooth and predictable, they would be far lower. The discomfort investors feel is the reason opportunities exist at all. The chapter also explores how people mislabel volatility as risk, when in fact, volatility is often the price of avoiding real risk. True risk is the chance of permanent loss, running out of money, being forced to sell at the wrong time, or abandoning a strategy entirely. Volatility is temporary. Panic-driven decisions can be permanent. Housel gives examples of how this misunderstanding leads people astray. Investors may avoid stocks entirely because of short-term fluctuations, choosing safer-looking assets that fail to keep up with inflation. In doing so, they avoid visible discomfort but accept hidden long-term risk. Another key insight in the chapter is that the most valuable financial rewards often have the highest emotional price tags. High returns require patience. Independence requires frugality. Entrepreneurship requires uncertainty. Flexibility requires saving instead of spending. There is no upside without a downside. Housel explains that many people mistake discomfort for danger. Feeling uneasy during market downturns, career changes, or periods of saving can feel like a sign something is wrong. In reality, discomfort is often the signal that you are paying the price for a worthwhile outcome. The chapter also connects this idea to career and life decisions. High-paying jobs often demand long hours, stress, and reduced autonomy.
Creative careers may offer fulfillment, but come with income instability. There is no perfect option, only trade-offs. The mistake is assuming you can have rewards without sacrifices. Housel encourages readers to name the price in advance. If you decide to invest in stocks, accept that large drawdowns will occur. If you pursue financial independence, accept that you may live differently from peers. If you aim for high achievement, accept periods of exhaustion or uncertainty. When the price is expected, it becomes manageable. He warns that unexpected costs are what cause people to abandon good plans. People are not shocked by losses, they are shocked by losses they didn't emotionally prepare for. Preparation doesn't eliminate pain, but it prevents panic. Another powerful point in the chapter is that endurance matters more than intelligence. The people who succeed financially are often not the smartest, but the ones who can tolerate discomfort longer than others. They stay invested, stay disciplined, and stay patient while others quit. Housel also highlights how stories of success often hide the price paid. We see the outcome, not the journey. This creates unrealistic expectations. When people try to replicate success without understanding its cost, they are unprepared for the struggle that follows. The chapter reinforces the idea that good financial behavior often feels uncomfortable in the short term. Saving instead of spending feels restrictive. Holding investments during downturns feels scary. Avoiding lifestyle inflation feels boring, but these discomforts are the cost of long-term stability and freedom. Housel makes it clear that the goal is not to eliminate discomfort, but to choose the discomfort you can live with. Some people are comfortable with market volatility, but hate frugality. Others prefer stable returns, but lower growth. There is no universal right answer, only personal alignment. The chapter closes with a powerful reframing. The question is not whether you will pay a price, but which price you choose to pay. You can pay now with discipline, patience, and restraint, or pay later with regret, stress, and lost freedom. The core lesson of Nothing's Free is deeply practical. Every worthwhile financial outcome has a cost, and success comes from understanding, accepting, and enduring that cost. When you stop expecting free lunches, you stop being surprised and start making better decisions.
The Rich Diary Podcast, solely for education, motivation, empowerment, and striving for mastery. Please like, subscribe, and share now.
Chapter 16, You and Me, examines how deeply personal money decisions are and why comparing your financial choices to others is one of the fastest ways to make poor decisions. Morgan Housel argues that your financial goals should be shaped by your own circumstances, values, and risks, not by what works for someone else. What is reasonable for one person may be reckless or insufficient for another. Housel opens by pointing out that financial advice often fails because it ignores context. When we hear about someone else's success, an investor's returns, an entrepreneur's breakthrough, a friend's rapid career growth, we naturally want to emulate them. But what we see is only the outcome, not the unique conditions that made it possible. Every financial decision exists within a specific set of variables: age, income stability, health, family responsibilities, personality, goals, and luck. When people compare themselves to others without sharing those variables, they inherit risks they may not be equipped to handle. Housel emphasizes that the most dangerous financial behavior is assuming that what worked for someone else will work for you. This is especially true in investing. Two people can invest in the same asset and experience entirely different outcomes based on timing, emotional discipline, and personal needs. He gives the example of market volatility. A young investor with a steady income may be able to tolerate large fluctuations because time is on their side. A retiree relying on investments for income cannot afford the same level of volatility. The asset isn't good or bad on its own. Its suitability depends on who owns it. The chapter also highlights how envy distorts financial decisions. Seeing others appear wealthier or more successful creates pressure to keep up, often leading people to take risks that don't align with their circumstances.
This comparison-driven behavior increases stress and undermines long-term plans. Housel explains that social comparison ignores the cost side of success. You may admire someone's wealth or lifestyle without seeing the sacrifices, risks, stress, or luck involved. When you chase the outcome without understanding the price, you expose yourself to unnecessary danger. Another key insight in the chapter is that financial success is path-dependent. Where you start, when you start, and what happens along the way all matter. Someone who began investing during a bull market may have confidence and capital that others don't. Someone who experienced early losses may behave more cautiously. Neither is wrong, they're shaped by experience. Housel also discusses how people have different risk capacities, not just risk tolerances. Risk tolerance is emotional, how much volatility you can stomach. Risk capacity is practical, how much loss you can afford without changing your life. Two people may feel equally comfortable with risk, but only one may have the financial cushion to absorb losses. This distinction explains why blanket advice is dangerous. Strategies that assume high risk tolerance or large safety nets may work beautifully for some and devastate others. Understanding your own limits is more important than following popular strategies. The chapter reinforces the idea that there is no universal definition of enough. One person may prioritize wealth accumulation while another prioritizes stability or time freedom. Judging your progress by someone else's metrics leads to dissatisfaction and poor decisions. Housel ties this back to happiness. Financial satisfaction comes from alignment, when your money supports your values and life goals. When money becomes a scoreboard against others, it loses its purpose and becomes a source of anxiety. He also explores how public narratives of success often create unrealistic expectations. Media stories highlight extraordinary outcomes, not typical ones. This skews perception and makes normal progress feel inadequate. People underestimate how much luck contributes to extreme success and overestimate the role of strategy. Another powerful point in the chapter is that your financial strategy must fit your behavior. Even if a strategy is objectively sound, it's useless if it causes you to panic, lose sleep, or abandon it during stress. What works for someone else may clash with your emotional makeup. Housel encourages readers to focus inward rather than outward. Instead of asking, "What are others doing?" ask, "What risks can I afford? What goals matter to me? And what decisions help me sleep at night?" These questions lead to sustainable choices. The chapter also touches on humility. Recognizing that you don't know other people's full stories and that others don't know yours reduces comparison and improves judgment. It allows you to define success on your own terms. Housel concludes by reminding readers that finance is not a competition. There is no finish line where everyone is measured by the same standard. Your goal is not to beat others, but to build a life that works for you. The core lesson of You and Me is simple but powerful. The right financial decision is the one that fits your life, not someone else's highlight reel. When you stop comparing and start aligning money with your own values and limits, clarity and confidence follow.
Chapter 17, The Seduction of Pessimism, explores why negative stories about money, markets, and the economy feel more convincing than positive ones, and how this bias can quietly sabotage long-term financial success. Morgan Housel argues that pessimism is emotionally appealing, intellectually seductive, and often misleading, while optimism, especially long-term optimism, tends to be correct but uncomfortable to believe. Housel begins by observing that pessimism spreads faster and feels smarter than optimism. Bad news grabs attention. It feels urgent, realistic, and sophisticated. When someone predicts disaster, they often sound informed and cautious. When someone predicts progress, they risk sounding naive or careless. This imbalance shapes how people interpret financial information. The media plays a major role in reinforcing pessimism. News outlets are incentivized to highlight crises, crashes, scandals, and failures because they attract attention. Slow, steady progress, rising living standards, technological advancement, gradual wealth creation is less dramatic and therefore less visible. As a result, people develop a skewed perception of reality. Housel explains that pessimism is easier to sell than optimism because it requires no patience. Negative events happen quickly and dramatically. Positive change often unfolds slowly and quietly over years or decades. Humans are wired to react to immediate threats, not long-term trends, which makes pessimistic narratives feel more real. This leads to one of the chapter's central ideas. Short-term pessimism often sounds smart, but long-term optimism is more accurate. History is filled with recessions, crashes, wars, and crises, but also with extraordinary progress in health, technology, wealth, and quality of life. Those who focus only on the bad miss the bigger picture. Housel emphasizes that progress is not linear. It moves in fits and starts with setbacks along the way. Because setbacks are obvious and painful, they dominate attention. Progress, however, compounds quietly. Over time, its impact is massive, but in the moment, it's easy to overlook. He gives examples from economic history. Markets crash frequently, sometimes violently. These events are unforgettable. But over long periods, markets tend to rise because productivity, innovation, and human ingenuity advance. Investors who let short-term pessimism override long-term optimism often miss out on compounding gains. The chapter also explores how pessimism offers emotional protection. Expecting the worst feels safer than hoping for the best. If disaster happens, you feel validated. If it doesn't, you're pleasantly surprised. Optimism, by contrast, feels risky. It exposes you to disappointment. But Housel argues that this emotional comfort comes at a cost. Persistent pessimism leads to inaction, excessive caution, and missed opportunities. People who constantly expect collapse may avoid investing, starting businesses, or pursuing growth. Over time, this avoidance can be more damaging than the risks they were trying to avoid. Another key insight is that pessimism focuses on specific events, while optimism relies on broader systems. It's easy to imagine how a particular crisis could cause harm. It's harder to imagine how millions of people solving problems over time create progress. Yet history shows that systems, markets, innovation, education tend to adapt and improve despite repeated shocks. Housel also discusses how optimism requires faith in resilience, not perfection. Long-term optimism does not deny the existence of problems. It assumes that problems will continue to arise, but that humans will respond, adapt, and improve. This kind of optimism is grounded in history, not wishful thinking. The chapter highlights how investors often confuse pessimism with prudence. Being cautious is wise, but being permanently pessimistic, assuming the worst will always happen, can lead to paralysis. The key difference is that prudent optimism prepares for setbacks without abandoning belief in progress. Housel points out that the most successful investors are often those who can endure pessimistic environments without adopting pessimistic worldviews. They acknowledge risks, prepare for downturns, and leave room for error, but they remain invested in long-term growth. He also explains why doom and gloom predictions are rarely held accountable. When pessimists predict collapse and it doesn't happen, the prediction is often forgotten or rationalized. When optimists predict growth and it happens gradually, it feels unremarkable. This asymmetry keeps pessimism socially rewarded. Another powerful idea in the chapter is that progress happens too slowly to notice, but too fast to ignore. Over short periods, improvements seem insignificant. Over long periods, they transform society. This mismatch between perception and reality fuels pessimism. Housel encourages readers to zoom out. Instead of anchoring decisions to recent headlines or emotional reactions, look at long-term trends. Wealth creation, technological advancement, and improved living standards have persisted despite repeated crises. The chapter concludes with a balanced message. Optimism is not blind faith, and pessimism is not wisdom.
The healthiest mindset combines awareness of risk with belief in long-term progress. Prepare for setbacks, but don't bet against humanity's ability to adapt and grow. The core lesson of The Seduction of Pessimism is clear. Pessimism feels smarter, but optimism is more useful. Those who resist the emotional pull of negativity and instead commit to patient, long-term thinking are more likely to build lasting wealth and peace of mind.
Chapter 18, When You'll Believe Anything, examines how desperation, fear, and uncertainty can push people to accept unrealistic promises and flawed ideas about money. Morgan Housel argues that financial decisions become most dangerous when people feel they have no good options, because desperation lowers skepticism and makes even implausible beliefs feel reasonable. Housel opens the chapter by noting a recurring pattern throughout history. Periods of financial stress are often followed by the rise of get-rich-quick schemes, miracle investments, and financial fantasies. When traditional paths to stability feel blocked, people become willing to believe anything that offers hope. The core idea of the chapter is simple but unsettling. The worse your situation feels, the more vulnerable you are to bad ideas. This is not a flaw in intelligence, it's a human response to pressure. When people feel trapped, rational judgment gives way to emotional survival instincts. Housel explains that financial hardship creates a psychological state where risk feels less risky. If someone believes they are already losing, the downside of a gamble seems less meaningful. This mindset makes extreme bets, scams, and unrealistic strategies appear attractive. He gives historical examples of speculative bubbles where people ignored obvious red flags because the alternative, accepting slow progress or limited opportunity, felt unbearable. In these moments, hope becomes more powerful than logic. The chapter also explores how narratives gain strength when they promise certainty in an uncertain world. People crave clear explanations and simple solutions, especially during chaotic times. Anyone offering confidence, authority, and optimism, no matter how unfounded, can gain followers. Housel highlights that financial charlatans often succeed not because they are persuasive, but because their audience is emotionally primed. When people are anxious or desperate, skepticism fades. The desire for relief overrides the need for evidence. Another key insight is that extreme beliefs often emerge when expectations and reality drift too far apart. When people expect progress but experience stagnation or decline, they search for explanations that justify their frustration. This is when conspiracy theories, financial myths, and magical thinking take hold. Housel ties this to investing behavior. During long periods of low returns or economic stagnation, investors may abandon sound strategies in favor of speculative assets or aggressive bets. The appeal lies not in logic, but in the promise of escape. He also discusses how financial pain narrows time horizons. When survival feels uncertain, long-term planning becomes irrelevant. People focus on immediate relief, even if it creates long-term harm. This explains why short-term solutions often dominate during crises. The chapter warns that complex problems rarely have simple solutions, yet simple solutions are the most appealing when people feel overwhelmed. This creates fertile ground for misinformation and poor decision-making. Housel emphasizes that belief is often stronger than truth when emotions run high. People don't evaluate ideas based on accuracy, they evaluate them based on how they make them feel. If a belief offers comfort, control, or hope, it becomes persuasive regardless of evidence. He connects this to financial markets, where stories often drive behavior more than data. Investors may cling to narratives that justify their positions, ignoring contradictory information. This confirmation bias intensifies during stress. Another important point is that people rarely believe extreme ideas in isolation. Beliefs tend to spread socially. When others appear to succeed or claim to, skepticism weakens further.
Social proof becomes a powerful reinforcement even when the underlying idea is flawed. Housel also highlights how trust shifts during crises. Institutions and experts may lose credibility if they fail to prevent or explain hardship. In that vacuum, alternative voices gain influence regardless of reliability. The chapter does not mock or judge those who fall into these traps. Instead, Housel emphasizes empathy. He reminds readers that anyone can believe bad ideas under the right conditions. The goal is not to feel superior, but to recognize vulnerability and build safeguards against it. One of the chapter's most practical lessons is that financial resilience reduces susceptibility to bad ideas. People with savings, stable income, and margin for error are less likely to chase unrealistic promises. Stability protects not just money, but judgment. Housel encourages readers to focus on building buffers rather than chasing breakthroughs. When you're not desperate for immediate results, you can think more clearly, evaluate risks more objectively, and avoid emotional decisions. He also stresses the importance of humility. Acknowledging uncertainty, admitting what you don't know, makes you less likely to fall for overconfident claims. Extreme confidence is often a warning sign, not a reassurance. The chapter concludes by reinforcing a central theme of the book. Good financial behavior is less about intelligence and more about emotional control. When emotions are regulated, decisions improve. When emotions are overwhelmed, belief replaces reason. The core lesson of When You'll Believe Anything is sobering but empowering. Protecting yourself financially also protects your ability to think clearly. By building stability, patience, and room for error, you reduce the chances that fear or desperation will push you into believing and acting on bad ideas.
And this is the Rich Diary Podcast. If you love this content, please subscribe and share now. Mondays to Fridays, 12 p.m. each day.
Chapter 19, All Together Now, brings together the book's core ideas into a cohesive philosophy of money. Rather than introducing new concepts, Morgan Housel synthesizes the lessons from previous chapters into a practical framework for making better financial decisions. The chapter emphasizes that success with money is not about mastering complex formulas, but about consistently applying simple behavioral principles over time. Housel begins by reminding readers that money is deeply emotional. It reflects personal history, values, fears, and hopes. Because of this, financial success depends more on behavior than intelligence. The smartest plan is useless if emotions cause you to abandon it. He reiterates that no one is crazy with money. People make decisions based on their own experiences and incentives. Understanding this helps reduce judgment, comparison, and overconfidence. It also reinforces the importance of building strategies that fit your personal reality. The chapter revisits the idea that luck and risk are inseparable. Outcomes are influenced by factors beyond control, which means humility is essential. Recognizing luck prevents arrogance during success and bitterness during failure. Housel then connects this to the importance of room for error. Because risk is always present, plans must be designed to survive uncertainty. Survival, not optimization, is the foundation of compounding and long-term success. He emphasizes again that compounding is powerful but fragile. It requires time, patience, and the ability to stay invested through inevitable setbacks. The biggest threat to compounding is not poor returns, but poor behavior. The chapter highlights freedom as one of the most meaningful goals of money. Money's greatest value is the ability to control your time and choices. This requires savings, flexibility, and modest expectations, not flashy success. Housel ties in the idea that what you don't see matters more than what you do. Wealth is often invisible. Avoiding lifestyle inflation, resisting comparison, and focusing on long-term goals quietly compound into freedom. He also reinforces that reasonable behavior beats rational behavior. The best strategies are those you can stick with during stress. Emotional sustainability matters more than mathematical precision. The chapter revisits pessimism and optimism, reminding readers that short-term pessimism often dominates attention, but long-term optimism has history on its side. Preparing for setbacks while believing in progress is the healthiest balance. Housel then stresses that everyone's path is different. Comparing your strategy to others is misleading and harmful. The right plan is one aligned with your values, risk capacity, and life circumstances. He also underscores the danger of financial desperation, which makes people vulnerable to bad ideas. Building stability protects both wealth and judgment. The chapter emphasizes that nothing is free. Every reward has a cost: volatility, patience, uncertainty, or sacrifice. The key is choosing the price you're willing to pay. Housel frames all these lessons as interconnected. None of them work in isolation. Together, they form a mindset rooted in humility, patience, resilience, and self-awareness. The chapter encourages readers to focus less on specific tactics and more on durable principles. Markets, technologies, and opportunities change. Human behavior remains consistent. Designing plans around behavior makes them future-proof. Housel concludes by reminding readers that financial success is personal, not competitive. There is no scoreboard. The goal is to build a life where money reduces stress rather than increases it. The core message of All Together Now is empowering. You don't need to predict the future, beat the market, or be exceptional to succeed. You need discipline, patience, and a system that respects uncertainty and human behavior. Chapter 20, Confessions, serves as a personal and reflective conclusion to The Psychology of Money. Rather than offering new rules or frameworks, Morgan Housel shares his own financial beliefs and behaviors, openly acknowledging their imperfections. The purpose of this chapter is not to present a model for others to copy, but to demonstrate how principles discussed throughout the book can be applied in a real human life. Housel begins by making a candid admission. His financial strategy is shaped less by optimization and more by emotional comfort. He does not aim to maximize returns or beat the market. Instead, he prioritizes a plan that allows him to sleep well at night and remain consistent over decades. This confession reinforces one of the book's central themes: reasonable behavior beats rational behavior. Housel acknowledges that there are strategies that might produce higher returns on paper, but they would increase stress or tempt him to make poor decisions during volatile periods. Avoiding those risks is worth sacrificing some potential upside. He explains that he invests most of his money in low-cost index funds and holds them for the long term. He avoids leverage, speculation, and frequent trading. This approach is not glamorous, but it aligns with his temperament and long-term goals. Housel emphasizes that simplicity is intentional, not lazy. Simple strategies reduce the chance of catastrophic mistakes and make it easier to stay disciplined. Complexity, while intellectually appealing, often increases the risk of error. One of the most important confessions in the chapter is that Housel intentionally holds cash. From a purely rational standpoint, holding cash may seem inefficient because it earns little return, but emotionally, cash provides flexibility and peace of mind. It allows him to handle unexpected events without panic or forced decisions. He describes cash as a form of psychological insurance. It reduces the pressure to sell investments during downturns and provides confidence during uncertainty. This ties back to the idea of room for error. Buffers protect both finances and behavior. Housel also admits that he avoids debt, even when borrowing might be mathematically advantageous. While leverage can amplify returns, it also increases the risk of ruin. For Housel, the cost of potential failure outweighs the benefits of optimization.
He frames this not as a universal rule, but as a personal choice based on his tolerance for risk and stress. What works for him may not work for others, and that's the point. Financial decisions should be tailored, not copied.
Another confession is that Housel defines success in modest terms. He does not aspire to extreme wealth or status. His goal is independence, the ability to control his time and live according to his values. This aligns with the book's emphasis on freedom as money's greatest dividend. He also acknowledges the role of luck in his financial success. Rather than attributing outcomes solely to discipline or intelligence, he recognizes that timing, opportunity, and circumstances played a significant role. This humility reinforces the importance of avoiding arrogance during success. Housel explains that recognizing luck helps him maintain reasonable expectations and resist excessive risk. It also fosters empathy toward others whose outcomes differ. The chapter touches on how invisible wealth plays a role in his mindset. Housel chooses not to display wealth or inflate his lifestyle because spending heavily reduces flexibility. Saving quietly increases options and reduces stress. He confesses that he values endurance over excitement. Investing is intentionally boring for him. He believes boredom is a feature, not a flaw, because it discourages impulsive behavior. Another key reflection is that financial plans should serve life, not the other way around. Housel resists turning money into a scorecard or competition. He views it as a tool to support well-being and autonomy. The chapter reinforces the idea that there is no perfect financial strategy. Every approach has trade-offs. The goal is not to eliminate regret or uncertainty, but to minimize the chance of catastrophic mistakes and emotional burnout. Housel concludes with a gentle but powerful message. The best financial plan is one that aligns with your values, personality, and long-term goals. It doesn't need to be impressive, it needs to be durable. The core lesson of Confessions is deeply human. You don't win with money by being flawless, you win by being consistent, humble, and self-aware. When your financial decisions respect who you are and how you behave under stress, success becomes sustainable.
The Rich Diary Podcast, solely for education, motivation, empowerment, and striving for mastery. The Rich Diary Podcast, solely for education, motivation, empowerment, and striving for mastery. Please like, subscribe, and share now.